Welcome to Early American Literature. I am Ron Spiener, and I will be your instructor for this term. Before we start looking at individual writers that we will be reviewing during this term, let's do a little bit of introduction about what exactly is American literature and how can we read it. What I would like you to learn during this lecture is be able to define what American literature is, explain what makes American literature American, explore what American literature is about, identify the genres or types of literature, develop methods of reading literature, develop methods of analyzing literature, develop methods of writing about literature, and to enjoy literature. I also would like you to be able to compare reading literature as to how reading literature is different from other types of reading, such as your textbooks. I'll list considerations in reading literature, read literature, discuss literature, write about literature. The question mark inside the circle on the slide will indicate that this slide may be part of the quiz that is attached to this lecture. So, what is literature? Broadly defined, it is any written or spoken material, but the term most often it refers to what is called creative works, works of the imagination or of the mind. Literature includes poetry, drama, fiction, and many kinds of nonfiction writing, as well as what you may find in oral, dramatic, and broadcast compositions not necessarily preserved in written format, such as films and television programs. So what is the purpose of literature? Why is it created? And this changes from period to period, from place to place, and from person to person. In China, the purpose of literature is very different than what you would find the purpose of literature in the United States. So let's look at a few of the areas that constitute the purpose. One of the most important purposes of literature is to preserve one's cultural heritage. This can include the values of the community, its sense of identity, who they are as a people. It can preserve the language of the people, and also is frequently used to preserve the religious and moral teachings of a community. You find this in the Bible and the Quran and the Rig Vedas and many other religious texts. Literature is also often used for philosophical purposes, to discuss the big issues in life, like love and hate, birth and death, sex and love, individualism, and any of the other kinds of isms that you may find. A third purpose of literature is for betterment. A betterment of yourself and betterment of the community. This can be political betterment, making sure that you follow the political aspirations of the government. Many totalitarian governments will say what you are to read and what you cannot read. It can be for religious betterment. And frequently it is for social betterment, betterment of society and of yourself. And finally, and most important, literature is frequently written just for enjoyment, for people to read and have fun with. And so literature should be fun. So let's look at a brief history of American literature. So the little video gave a good overview of American literature and the major changes that it saw over the last several centuries. This class will not go into the 20th century or modern literature. We will confine ourselves to between 1800 and 1900. So, what are some of the things that make American literature American? Well, first of all, our history. And it is pretty much a history of responding to conflict, wars. We started with a war as a country in the American Revolution, and through our history, each successive war made people respond to it in various ways. The most important war in American history is, of course, the Civil War, which had profound impact on American culture and American literature. There are a number of core beliefs that are part of American culture and therefore American literature. The belief in equality, the belief in nature, the belief in the importance of the individual in making their own way, and the belief that government is not necessarily to be trusted. We also believe in inventiveness and that nature can tell us secrets that will make our lives better. And we also believe in originality and individualism. Marcus Garvey, a civil rights activist of the early 1900s, wrote, "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." And so it is our past that holds us firmly into the present. So if we look at a literary timeline from 1600 to 1800, most of the writers, which we are not going to cover in this class, because quite frankly, they are really very boring, looked to England, wrote about England, and took up themes that were pretty much English. From 1800 to 1860, Americans were trying to find their own identity. And you get two trends, Romanticism and Gothic literature. We will be talking about both of them. But then this sort of optimism hit a bump with the Civil War, which again drastically changed American culture. And we'll be talking about it frequently throughout the course. From 1865 to 1914, we had a huge period of expansion, inventions. Thomas Edison came along with the telephone and with the light bulb, the phonograph, motion pictures, and hundreds of other inventions. Alexander Graham Bell started the telephone, and so much of what we have today started in that period. There was also a period of great immigration, particularly from Germany and Italy. And so you get two different trends in writing, realism and naturalism. We'll be looking at both authors in both of that. With World War I in 1914, again, America had a major cultural shift, and is the period that we sometimes call modernism. Many of the buildings that you see around Orlando that are old are from this period. And then after World War II, we had another shift with postmodernism, and particularly more recently with the advent of computers and the internet, both of which are in the process of changing literature today. So one of the primary principles and core beliefs of Americans is that all men are created equal. This is a founding principle of the United States. It is a principle that we are still in the process of trying to make true. Because we believe something doesn't necessarily mean that we practice it. Americans are fundamentally optimistic that the world can be a better place. All we need to do is work hard, and with ingenuity, we can make the world better. And if something doesn't work, well, we'll just go back and we'll figure out another way of doing it. We believe in inventiveness, that the human mind and determination can make a better world. Nature can be unlocked and controlled. We believe in originality. We are in the process always of creating our own traditions. You go to any food court at a mall and you'll see a number of ethnic restaurants. You'll see Chinese, Italian, Mexican, yet all the foods that are served there are not original to those countries. They are American adaptations of them. We always want to try something new. Jazz as a form of music is an American invention. We question. We want to know why. We also believe that America is a role model for the rest of the world. That the American experiment that started in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence can guide the rest of the world and other nations to follow. Now, this is both a good thing and a bad thing because it gives us a sense of superiority, and we try to go throughout the world and say, okay, you need to be like us. And we know that's not true. A core concept behind this is the idea of manifest destiny. And again, it has changed over the centuries, but it started off with the idea that America needed to be from coast to coast, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and so all the lands in between were to be ours, and we managed to either buy it or steal it. But it also means that we have a sense of moral superiority to the rest of the world. So let's talk about understanding literature, reading, analyzing, and writing about it. Reading literature should first and foremost be read for enjoyment. Look at it and say, okay, what is this fun? It can be read for intellectual stimulation. It can be read for just the beauty of the words. And it can be read for the writer's skill. So let's look at this very short poem by Carl Sandburg. He wrote it in 1916, so a little over 100 years ago. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. Very simple, short poem about fog. So when you look at a poem or any piece of literature, you want to consider its theme. What is it about? So this poem is about the fog. Why was it written? Well, sometimes it's written to educate people. Sometimes it's to talk about philosophical, the purpose. So you want to look at the purpose. And the purpose of this poem was to create the feeling of the fog. And the next thing you want to look at is how it develops. How does it give you the information? And when you look at the development, pay particular attention to how something starts and how it ends. writers tend to spend a great deal more time on how something starts and how something ends. Many times the start gives you clues as to what's going to go on, and the ending sums it up and gives you sometimes a moral or a different slant on the story itself. Consider the language and the words used. Why does the author choose certain words or events? Since literature is about language, do have a dictionary available, or look it up on Google. So when we look at the poem, the fog comes on little cat feet. Okay. He's creating the image of the fog like a cat, very silently creeping up. And he mentions that it sits on silent haunches. Now he chose the word haunches intentionally. The haunch is basically the rump or the backside of a person. And he chose it because it's a soft sound, haunches. And so it conveyed the meaning he wanted, but it also conveys the sound he wanted. When you're looking at this structure, look how the piece is put together. There usually is a problem at the beginning, then there is sort of a conflict that makes the problem worse, and then it comes a resolution. And if you watch any of the TV shows, including reality TV, you're going to see this basic pattern. And we'll talk about it more next week when we talk about the narrative arc. You also want to look at the characters, the who of the story or the poem. The protagonist is the hero, and the antagonist is the villain. You don't have much of a story if you do not have an antagonist, because then you would not have a hero. You want to look at the setting, where and when. Look at the time of day. Authors pay particular attention. A story may start in spring when there is growth and go through the story and end when it's fall, when things are starting to die. And so the story progresses up and then it goes down. Look at the plot, the what and the how. The climax, how things come to a head. And the denouement, how the author wraps things up and says, okay, I'm done telling you the story, and now you should feel satisfied. Look at the technical underside of it too. Such things as literary devices. What special devices are used? It can be allusion, which means referring to something else. Someone may say they had a star-spangled day. Well, they're referring to waving flags and patriotism. Alliteration is a repetition of sounds. Imagery is creating an image, so using the words to make you see something or smell something or evoking your senses. Irony is saying something but meaning the opposite of it. Grace is so graceful. She only fell down the stairs twice today. Symbolism is saying something that stands for something else. A rose given to someone can be a symbol of love. Also look at the historical period that the piece was written in. Look at when it was written, why it was written, and look at a general biography of the author. All of this will give you insight as to what you are reading might mean. You also need to do an evaluation, a considered opinion. Do you like it? Everything you read, you do not need to like. There is a poem by Sylvia Plath called Daddy, which is a great poem, but for me to read it, it's like fingernails on the blackboard, because it is not a kind poem about her father. I mean, she calls him a Nazi and a vampire. among other things. What did I think about the themes and the characters? So I want you to not only read this stuff, but think about it as how it affects you. So let's do a little practice. Here's a poem by Dorothy Parker. It was written in 1926, so it's a little bit after the period that we're studying. But it's a very simple poem. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acids stain you, and drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful, nooses give, gas smells awful. You might as well live. So the poem is called Resume. Now, resume in this case does not mean the same as what you do for a job, but resume means, it's French for summary. So when you look at the poem, you want to ask, what does it mean? What is the purpose? Why this style? Is this poem to be taken seriously? So if you look at the poem, you're going to look at there are several methods of killing yourself. Razors pain you and slice your wrists. Rivers are damp, you can drown yourself. Acids and drugs cause cramps. Guns aren't lawful. Nooses give. Gas smells awful. So she's going through a list of ways to commit suicide that may fail. And so rather than do something that's going to fail, you might as well live. So is this a serious poem? Yes and no. The subject is serious, but the approach is not particularly serious. You might want to look at the author's life and how did this affect the poem. Dorothy Parker lived from 1893 to 1967. She was very popular in the 20s and 30s and became less popular later in life. And so you might want to go to Wikipedia, which is fine, for a brief biography about Dorothy Parker and find out how her life may have affected her poems. You then want to look and say, okay, what is it? You look at it and say, classification. Oh, okay, this is a poem. It's not a short story. It's not a piece of nonfiction. You look at the organization. So you're looking at, the first two lines start with R's. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acids stain you, and drugs cause cramps. Guns aren't losses, nooses give, gases smell awful. You might as well live. Look at the word choices and the images that she is using as well. She used very short sentences and very short lines, and she does not rhyme. Not all poetry rhymes. Look at the ideas and values that the author is trying to say. Is she saying that suicide is wrong? No, she's saying that trying to do it may not be wise. And so that's a view of life and morals that she is presenting in the poem. It may not be the same as your moral values, and you have to accept that. And because we'll be looking at things where you'll say, "Oh, that's not what I want to believe. They really did that?" And so you need to look at what the values were of the time and what she's trying to say. You look at whether there's a psychological side to it, and whether there is a political side to it or a religious side. So you want to look at what values are trying to be conveyed. Then finally, you want to look at the audience. And there's two types of audiences. The audience of the time that it was written, and you as an audience. So look and see what it meant to the people it was originally intended to read it, and look at what it means to you. Great pieces of literature change meaning over time. What people saw when it was written, people later on will value. And we'll see an example of that in the novel that we're going to read, Billy Budd. When Melville wrote the novel, it was not particularly well received and it was not thought of as a great novel. Today, it's considered one of America's great novels. So people change their opinions as further experiences apply. So how do you write about literature? Develop your own personal response. I don't want you to copy and paste things from what other people have said. I want to know what you think about it. Now, you can go and look and see what other people have said, maybe get clarification of some things, but ultimately it is what I want your opinions. Select how you're going to write about it. Ask questions about it. Talk to it and say, why did you say this? Why did you do this? Why does it end this way? Why does it start this way? And then finally evaluate it as to how does it relate to my life? Does it have any bearing on my life? Dorothy Parker's poem, while rather frivolous, for people who have attempted suicide or are thinking suicide, may have a profound meaning to them. And so what one person gets out of a piece of literature is not the same as another person's going to get out of it. Ask yourself, do I like it? And you can say no. I have no problems with you saying no. I just want to know why. So, analysis of literature you need to consider the purpose. Literature can be approached in many ways. You can be looking at the author's life and how it affected it. You can look at the values that went into creating it or the values that have come up around it since then. You can look at the text of it, how the language was used and how the structure was used. And you can look at how the audience received it or how you are receiving it. Just remember that what makes American literature is history, our philosophy of equality, our desire for inventiveness and originality. The purposes of literature are cultural heritage, philosophical betterment, entertainment, and some resources for you. Thank you, and I hope that you got something out of this presentation. Please answer the couple of questions at the end of this presentation and do the quiz that is attached to it. Thank you.